we're really happy to have people come in person. It's been so long, right? To like seeing people, no, return back to previous one. Thank you. And what we will be talking to you today is a result of a year of work. So just to put some frame for you, some idea where all this research come from. Me, Professor Nunn, and Bell, we working together on a project which is supported by the State Department. It's a contract with the State Department where we work on improving contact theory and improving how it's specifically applied to processes of peace building, development, empowerment, and other processes within our field. So what we did during our very first year, we conducted research on all available literature and produced 160-page report, which has come in attraction. We holding all reports together until we finish the research, and everything will be become public starting next September. Then we can spend entire new year. We spent time, not new year, but like 6 months or 7 months analyzing, and we will speaking about specific methodology and analyzing multiple projects to produce report. We will be speaking to you today. And finally, our next stage, we're already working very deeply. We have 8 projects across the globe, from Libya to Bangladesh, from Georgia to Kyrgyzstan, from Fiji to Senegal. And we're working in all these projects to help people who use contact theory in their work, multiple different work, to make their project better, how to design projects. So we're basically functioning as a design and clinic for projects, which how to make them more effective in their engagement based on theories, based on lessons learned from our analysis. And the next stage in September we will start, will be very exciting stage where we will be really engaging with everyone using our labs, our centers as much as possible to start developing ways how we want to distribute information, how we want to share information. So today is one of the ways where we happy to share results of our research. So the next one, please. So this one is World Cloud for our second stage, where we analyze multiple projects. And it shows you that what this analysis is exactly. Project is in the center, but we're also showing what activities are used in communities to improve work, to train people, to include process of women inclusion, include youth, and how we can create connection between local and governments and other ways. So it's just a small portrait of you, what we will be speaking about today. Okay, next one, please.
So, Karina mentioned we had first a literature review year, very in-depth literature review about contact theory and what is known about contact theory. And then more recently, we've had a document review as a part of what we're doing. And we need to admit, Jeff.
I will admit.
And the document review involved collecting project documents from 3 sources. First, the State Department, who's funding this work, they asked some implementers who have State Department funding, would you share some of your project reports with these people? And that gave us 13 documents. And we also asked some interviewees. You'll hear next about the interview methodology. that gave us 13 documents, and we wanted more. So we then went to the Development Experience Clearinghouse, where a bunch of development projects, particularly everything that is US funded, is required to be placed there. So our data source is certainly biased towards things funded by the US government. Not 100% those, but many of them are. And from the Development Experience Clearinghouse, we found publicly available project reports. These are final reports or evaluation reports of projects. We created an Excel spreadsheet of all 91 project documents, and we did an analysis. We looked at the geographic area of the project, the source of the data, who were the implementing organizations. Does this document tell us enough about the conflict dynamics, the intervention structure, contextual factors, mechanisms of change, outcomes from the project, and the areas of application? Once we looked at all those, then we could see, is this eligible for inclusion? In a few cases, we had projects that were eligible for inclusion, but we had multiple projects from the same implementer. So we chose to exclude and make it that no one implementer would have more than 2 projects represented in our whole final selection of 35 project documents. We also made sure that we didn't have more than 1 project per country represented so that we wouldn't be biased towards one particular area of conflict dynamics. Next slide, please.
The other thing that we did, as Susan mentioned, is interviews. So our sampling was snowball, meaning that we started off with recommendations made firstly by the original project manager, which was Michael Swigart, if anyone is familiar with him. So he reached out first, and then based on those first few contacts, then we were able to reach out to more participants. So in this way, we reached out to over 50 DRG practitioners that were engaged in, that are engaged in contact theory. The inclusion criteria was quite simple in the sense that we wanted practitioners who are currently working or have worked on, ideally within the past 5 to 10 years, in DRG programs that involve bringing groups of different, bringing members of different groups together. And this had to be an intentional means to reach that particular outcome of that program. At the end, we were able to reach out to interview, 26 DRG practitioners. And they really represent various parts of the world. So we have Europe, we have the MENA region, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Caucasus, and Latin America. The interviews were semi-structured, and we asked a set of 11 questions.
Okay, now it's probably a good time to reveal what contact theory is, because we didn't speak about it. Who knows what contact theory is? Okay.
Contact theories in divided societies or divided groups, the main problem between their tension is about lacking of contact, lacking of communication with each other. So if we create that kind of environment for them, it can help us to reduce tension or create new conciliation rooms for us. It's something like that.
Yes, exactly. So the contact theory is the way that if we bring groups together, we will improve their relations, we will reduce prejudice, we will increase collaboration, increase the reconciliation efforts. And so the idea that bringing people together should work. That we found not always. We found there are a lot of issues which developed, and during our just a quick escorts, we presented it last year, but those who didn't see it, what we found during our theoretical analysis, we found that a lot of new development, especially development in the area of identity-based conflicts, because we're speaking about bringing groups together, who exactly were intergroup dynamics. This is where we found that in this area, people did not have enough use of theoretical ideas. And we also, as you see, will find what we will discuss today, what actually happening on the ground. What work, what doesn't work there. Okay, so what we first find out is types of programs, where actually State Department, where USAID, GIZ, and other organizations which engage with conflict dynamics, with development, basically democracy, human rights, and improvement, where they use it. And what we found that majority of projects used for addressing conflict and security, which is not surprisingly, in government participation, improving relations, and skill development. So let's go through each of them. So addressing conflict and security specifically, what these particular projects do? They prevent violence, they mitigate conflicts between groups, provide economic opportunities, address difficult past and difficult issues of people, supporting negotiations, and also empowering marginalized people. What specific forms of contact are employed? And what we found is that some of them bring together youth, former combatants, victims, community members in this very interesting mix to address issues of marginalization of youth, address issues of addressing issues of transformation of communities, of dealing with extremism, mostly importantly, building bridges between local government and state institutions. Also, what's very interesting, they bring a lot of multiple sectors together, engage groups basically based on specific context of the conflict, bring together women, youth, and minorities to talk about conflict dynamics. Some of them are dialogues between victims and survivors of violence. And finally, we're speaking about community members and local government. What results of these projects are countering violent extremism, as I told, violence prevention, community support, a sustainable community development, and relationship between state and government. So this is the way how it's functioning on this. Next, please. Then it's move into government, improving government and participation of people in democratic processes. The idea is strengthen civic society, improve engagement of different groups, especially between local government and citizens, and also improve different services, delivery of different services to communities, from legal services to services related to food, to education, and others. What you see here, completely different types of contacts used. Context-based meetings of community groups, government officials and community members, also local government and community members. But what is interesting here, they bring different stakeholders. This work requires a lot of stakeholder analysis, stakeholder mapping, and bringing groups together. And finally, a lot of work done on working on contact between local law institutions, police, and government. So outcomes, we see local collaborative governments, which is very important, improving government processes in communities, policy change on different levels, even on the national level, increased agency and participation of people, strengthening society and improved rights. Next one, please. Next was very interesting, which didn't address conflict specifically and didn't address the government participation, but was really addressing the very first reason why contact was used, how to improve just relations. Of course, it has preventive issues, early warning for contact, of course, it has strengthening civic society meanings, but the main aim was just improving relations between groups. So this idea is providing opportunities for dialogues for communities which were never to each other. Increase social cohesion on both vertical and horizontal social cohesion. Increase collaboration of different groups which didn't collaborate before. Mixed intergroup contact and in-group contact where it was interchangeably meetings within the groups and then between groups. A community building was very important part of it. So what did you say here? What we found that the following forms were used. Dialogue space between different groups, and groups just meet to have a dialogue, supporting structural dialogue. We heard so many times, we'll speak about limitations, but I really have to stress here. If you just bring people together and you do not think about conflict sensitivity, intergroup dynamics, polarizations, identity, and all of this, if it's not structural dialogue, it will just make it worse. We heard so many times, if you just bring groups together to talk, it will just shape conflict even stronger. Organize both vertical, horizontal cohesion meetings, so then really thinking how to bring together government institutions and communities, but also communities across different boundaries. They also feel a series of groups and intergroup meetings, and also long-term engagement where projects last for several years to give opportunity for people to learn about each other. And again, results, we see improved relationships, increased cohesion, decreased polarization, and increased tolerance between people. Next one, please. Developing skills and capacity in the last type of it. It was interesting that we found this particular type of activities of government and non-government organizations because they were actually using this idea of contact theory to bring people and to learn together. Not just giving learning of people in one group or another group, but learning together, creating these opportunities for mutual understanding through learning was very important part. So we see contact-based training and education. A lot of people have strong beliefs that if we do training, not only for one group, but multiple groups, through their reflection, through their feedback, they will learn a lot. Develop skills with increased capacity stakeholders to implement policies in communities, and of course, engaging in peace process. So what we see here, trainings, not surprisingly. Trainings which bring members of different groups, engage representative of multiple groups in education, bringing members together, and also mediation trainings. And as a result, we saw capacity building, improvement policies, civic engagement, mental health, and high morale among people. Next, please. So next part was important to understand. Now we know where contact theory is used in this space. Now we know where contact theory used in peace, for peace building, reconciliation, and so on. But what are theories behind it? What are so-called theories of change which people use? And we really need to acknowledge that among our members, very few people who we interviewed and we did research on this projects, very few people actually implicitly stated, this is our theory of change. many of the people, we actually had to do specific thinking and research. What they refer, what mechanisms they are using, what they believe will bring change in contact to define them. Now, you're in luck, we now have a list of 40-something theories of change, which can be used, which were not formulated in advance. Majority of the theories of change concern collaborative approaches, relationship-led approaches, and addressing differences and conflict. Okay. So collaborative approaches, what they were mostly concentrated on. If we change behavior of the people through meetings, through contact, then they will be more willing to collaborate. If we teach people how to collaborate, then they will be working together for future on different projects. Co-creation was also very interesting theory of change. If we come together and co-create, co-design, form new activities, then people will be more willing to engage in collaboration with people. Knowledge building and sharing, again, was very important mechanisms. And it's not surprisingly for us that attitude change and increased capacity were less developed, because even social psychology now moving away from beliefs that if you change attitude, that people will behave differently. We really were pleased that our practitioners mostly work on behavioral change. What we were not pleased that very few people were working on social norms, but now we're working with some projects with specific. Today we had me and Susan with Kyrgyzstan, and they were like specifically telling us, we're changing these norms. We want us to help us to deal with the norms. I'm like, yes, please. Okay, next one, please. Relationship-led approach. So what we found again, mostly people believe if we create opportunity for mutual learning, people will improve relations. It will bring people from different countries, from different communities, from different ideas. So then if they learn together and we learn about each other, we improve relations. One of the keys, we see it also now in our research, in our stage, trust building. If we build trust between communities, easy, not at all. We're exploring the ways how to do it. It's forthcoming attraction. Focus of commonalities. So if we focus on what's similar between us, then we can produce future improvement in relations. Concentration of empathy. Very few were working on addressing trauma or network building as a mechanism of future improved relations. Next one, please. Addressing differences, conflict. It's very different. Remember, its previous one was mutual learning, developing commonality. This one was really on trying to find what are some differences between people. Identity work. I was extremely pleased that a lot of practitioners were using identity work, understanding that it's a key. Unless people understand how their identity impacts their views, perceptions, ideas, and values, you could not change conflict. They need to see how identity actually define conflict, help them to see it, and then understand their own belonging to different groups. Opening dialogue between groups which were not able. We saw mixing different groups together, then you bring multiple groups and help them to understand, and also providing self space for convenience. And finally, next one, please. We also find some very specific types, which usually speaking about reducing social injustice. For example, if you bring together dominant and marginalized groups to discuss injustice, they will be able to create collective actions. If we bring community members and youth to discuss youth marginalization, they will be able to prevent violent extremism. So we will looking also in some very specific theories of change. Next, please. And finally, in this particular area, we were looking at what tools and practices are the most effective and the most, what people are using and what people do not use, what is available but people not use. Because we want to, our tool is also create this set or repertoire of practices, tools, what people can do, then they will so what we found that this is a major forms of organized meetings. People use workshops, reflective sessions with people, deep work, which it means that people go deeper into discussions of, for example, identity work or discussion of what are issues in communities. And they also do it for the long time. Focus groups, we saw dialogues and also consultations, mostly between government and local community members. And we also found a set of media tools, from digital tools to manuals and so on. Next, please. So we were looking into practices, what people used. We find 4 major types of practices. Next one, please. So relationship building practices were mutual learning. Then people use BRIN, again, we discussed this, but it's as a practice of mutual learning was used here. Bridging language barriers. We were really pleased to see that, because it's not about the speaking people different languages. It's not translation. It's opportunity for people to talk together with the same meanings, because then government come and community members come together. They have very different meanings of exactly this. They use different words. They misunderstand each other. They basically speaking across each other, parallel each other, without really taking the problem into the discussions. So it's very important to find ways how government can listen to communities, but communities also can listen to the government and use the same language, the same. Just to show you, like, example, in indigenous communities, government use word commodities, come and speak about commodities, but indigenous communities use do not use this word. For them, it's something underground which should not be touched, something sacred underground. This example today, again, we had, like, I was pleased that she stressed very specifically, told when we brought government together and people together, they just didn't understand period each other. They will speak in completely different, define problem in completely different way. So this is a bridging language barriers. Common ground approach, people know I will not go there, providing different avenues for contact. A lot of people that are very important, not just like, okay, let's meet here every 2 weeks. They were mostly creative, how to have collaborative events, celebrations, tours, and so on to bring people together. Collaborative learning and skill building. We see building capacity. Mentoring was very important. Very few projects we found actually were using mentoring. So it means that you continue mentor and support people, application of the skills, ideas in their everyday life. Trainings of trainers and management mediation. And also what was very important, projects which we really feel it's working for them, it's financial support for participants. It's been giving them transportation means, giving them money for babysitting if you engage young women, giving them opportunity to come for several days. This was very important part, and even small stipends for participants, especially for consuls and so on. And also addressing health, well-being, or traumas of participants was very important part. Next one, please. What we found is the key that projects which succeed would really see that they move in the right directions, put a lot of attention in their design. And design not only in the beginning, but constant redefinition, constant reassessing how we should assess, design our practices. So what we see is the major four questions which should be asked. Are all parts of design are contact-based? Are they all? How we use contact in different ways? Is any intervention which we using for both groups are need-based? Is it like a need-based? Does design emphasize development for both groups? We're not just bringing people together to improve relations. We're bringing people together to improve relations, to improve their lives. And also how design really stress sensitivity to the conflict. What are major conflict issues? What are major dynamics of identity and power? Who is excluded? Who is included? Are the community representatives really representing the community? Or they only representing their own voices? We know the phenomenon and some community representative the same, going from training to training, from program to program, without really representing different voices and different ideas. So this was the major ideas. And one more slide for me, please, next one. What we actually did, because we used Mark's QDA program for analysis of all of that. It's also allowed to create intercode analysis. So we analyzed how different types of programs, subtypes also, use different types of practices and tools. And we found, this is just one small example, table is huge, like several pages, to show you that actually we found that not all tools are used by all programs. So much missing, so much gaps and lacunas, then relationship building, for example, not used by reduced crime. None of them. We found then general approaches to conflict design, again, not design. So we found a lot of these gaps, which we're able to highlight and show then people doing any project design, how they create the systemic approach to context theory. Oh, it's a Belle, right? Next. Yes, Belle, it's yours.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Karina. Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. So I'll talk to you a little bit about contact conditions. As you may have heard so far, we've mentioned conditions here and there. But let's just quickly talk about conditions. So in the literature, Allport originally came up with these optimal to say intergroup contact conditions. They are four, and this, as you will see in just a moment, will speak a lot about the bridge between practice and theory. So the four conditions that we know that arise from the literature in that sense are, just for the purpose, very quickly, for the purpose of this presentation, it's equal group status within the situation, common goals, intergroup cooperation, and then support by authorities. So when it comes to these four main conditions for contact, we found that DRG practitioners do use these four main conditions. There's also, of course, a little bit of critique, which is to be expected. And then in terms of other conditions, I'm sorry, there was an interference. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yes.
Okay. And then for other conditions, we have just a couple that are unique in that sense. And we also have a little bit of combined, so the combination of these four conditions. So as you can see here from this graph, those four conditions that I mentioned to you before, you will see that collaboration is the one that's most used. And you won't find this particularly surprising at this point based on what Karina just presented to you, right? So if it's about relationships, for example, we know that we need collaboration in order to do that. It was also surprising to see that pleasant contact you can see that the fourth column is all of them combined, but the very last one is pleasant contact. Wasn't so much, we tried to not say that it wasn't as much used, but it wasn't as clearly used. It was perhaps a more nuanced way of using that particular condition. You will also see that support by authorities is the second largest condition in that sense used. And the combination, for example, of collaboration and support by authorities was also came up quite often in that sense. Equal status, it's also there, although much like pleasant contact, so it is the third most common. However, I think we were expecting a little more here. And so let's just talk a little bit about these top three. So collaboration meant really a broad range of engagement. It meant collaboration between target groups, between civil society organizations, between government and community. It meant collaborative learning, intersector collaborations, where you have partnerships that go over those sector lines. And then other conditions, as I mentioned, support by authority and equal status, were not as evident out there. And like I mentioned, pleasant contact was not mentioned in that sense. Problems, of course, plenty of problems, although it's quite interesting. It is perhaps one of the most interesting things we have found is that DRG practitioners are not quite clear about what these conditions mean and how to apply them and what do they mean exactly. And then on the other hand, the other half of it, they simply thought that it was not really needed. Conditions aren't really needed for the success of the program or project. So some of the limitations, and you may recall that Karina mentioned a few, so let's look at them a little more closely. So when it comes to challenges that DRG, by the way, I don't think I've mentioned this before, but DRG stands for Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance Program. So when I say DRG, I mean that. So DRG programs limitations, they mostly, as you will recall from a few slides ago, it was all about project management. So how do we design these programs? It's really a lot of issues have come up, but also we saw quite some portions here in terms of limitations being taken by external factors as well as participants. And let's get a little more into detail, which is, so in terms of project management design, most of the project management challenges here are all about design. The second one you see here, it's implementation. So it's all about, in many ways, practitioners were sharing with us, they were sharing with us how the design, perhaps in some cases, it's ongoing. It shouldn't be just a one instance event. Staff challenges, plenty of staff challenges. So some of these programs, they really run on volunteer-based or other types of contracting work, right? So you don't really have the consistent support that you may need to implement your program. Then you have ineffective engagement, of course. So if you don't really quite have a good design, then probably some of the other challenges will follow, such as time issues, ineffective engagement, as well as poor methodologies, unfortunately. Picking good partners, that was probably one of those that I didn't quite expect, but it makes sense that it presents as an issue. Tools usage was the least mentioned within the project management. There were other limitations. The second most common was participant engagement, and the third most common was external factors. By participant engagement, what we mean by that is what Karina mentioned a little bit of earlier. So in terms of how do we effectively engage participants in a way that, you know, in different ways, really. One way is how do we make sure that, you know, they're absorbing the material and information, knowledge and skills. In other ways is how do we make sure that we have a seat at the table for particular participants, as was the case for example, for women, where they had underrepresentation. And then we have other limitations in terms of engagement, is that we have mistrust, as you would expect, between different groups. Other things which was related to, as Karina mentioned, bridging language barriers. Here we understand that that means, for example, misunderstanding of goals or implementation. And a little bit here in terms of engagement is also expiring mandate, so you can't quite engage participants in a desired way. And then finally, the third most common was external factors. So these are usually factors that are out of control of the implementers, of the practitioners, of even the agency funding these projects. And we talk about things like you know, settings or environments or events that are specific to that particular country or region. So for example, a conflict erupting, of course, it's an external factor, and that you can't, how much can you do about that, right? But it affects, of course, the program. There are other challenges also. There are donor related, so you can't really, it's hard to shift a program in that sense. And then, of course, you also have relations to how you also have the challenge of how you relate to the government, and whether the government in that particular region or country supports your mission and project. Some external factors were also, we were a bit surprised here to see that some thought that there was no need of a program at all. And pandemic, of course, had some effect as well. This is a representation of the different moving parts when it comes to the different challenges and issues that have come up, but it also presents a way of visualizing what are things that we or they could do to address them.
Thank you, Bill. So I'm going to now speak about two areas that we looked at with these project documents and the interviews. One of those two areas I'm going to speak about is evaluation. We looked at how are practitioners evaluating democracy, human rights, governance, contact-based theory programs. As they described their evaluations, they heavily emphasized the instruments they use and a little bit about the outcomes, and the output was barely mentioned, and a little bit about the problems. Next slide, please. So with the instruments, this is where we had most of the data from these documents, especially. They provided a lot about their instruments, and there were multiple evaluation approaches that we found in use. Artistic methodologies, participatory methodologies, and analysis of perception changes, enhanced understanding of others, and also community-based practices, mental health models, results analysis, and various self-assessments. Next slide, please. And then there was a lot of emphasis in the project documents on what tools were being used with these evaluations. So within the overall approaches, there are a series of evaluation tools. And here's this list of tools: the individual or group interviews, surveys or questionnaires, focus group discussions, desk reviews, observations, workshops, trainings, mapping exercise, virtual platforms, specialized IT tools or systems, and then some custom indicators such as a gender equity and social inclusion assessment that was used in several of the projects. Next slide. There was also some discussion of outcomes. The outcomes discussion emphasized long-term engagement, context-based work, measuring the humanization or dehumanization and doing outcome harvesting, and then looking at dialogue or political skills that came out of the program, that participants developed those skills. Next slide. Problems were also mentioned in the discussions on evaluation. There were problems about the evaluation methods are underdeveloped. Things are hard to measure. There are security concerns around doing evaluations. There are project management or implementation challenges, even just like being overworked and you don't have time for evaluation. And then finally, there were evaluations where no measurement took place on certain of the things that would have been interesting to look at. For whatever reason, the no measurement happened. Next, please. So that ends the evaluation discussion. I did not put a slide up there about outputs, because outputs were 1% of the mentions. I mean, the number is not so important as the tiny size of it. But very, very little mention about outputs, which was interesting. When you look at evaluations, that's like the easiest thing to count, is like how many people went through a training, how many people came to a dialogue. And those were just not emphasized, which, you know, is I think showing that people realize the goal of the program is not the output, but actually getting to the outcomes, which was the emphasis on evaluations. Okay, so another area for practitioners is how do we scale up our work? So in looking at how people describe scaling up, there's this idea in contact-based programming. You know, let's imagine you bring 10 people from one side and 10 people from another side together, right? And they're together for this contact program. We hope this will have bigger impact than just the 10 people and 10 people. So in scaling up, people talked about improving the project. They talked about increasing the skills. They talked about increasing the reach beyond those immediate people involved. And they spoke about increasing the financial support for the program, and then a little bit about increasing the political support or other ways of scaling up. Next slide, please. So the scaling up, as we look at it in this kind of different ways of scaling up, people discuss wanting the project to improve the project, to have better implementation, improved community engagement processes, and designing in an improved way. So this is like increasing the efficiency, effectiveness of the program. Another is increasing the reach. Here they build the networks, they link up the grassroots efforts to the national ones. They involve more project participants, they grow the project in these various ways. Another way of scaling up is increasing the skills, the capacity and knowledge building, facilitation and dialogue skills, behavioral attitudinal changes, and transfer of tools. And one of those is like that transfer from who's experienced the program to how do they tell their friends and family and so forth, and that grows. Then we had this idea about increasing financial support being part of the scaling up. You know, we started with a pilot program and then we got a bigger grant and we had to scale up with this, you know, great financial support. Having new economic opportunities was another way to increase the scaling up. And then finally, political support, when there was harmonization between government processes and contact-based programs, and there was leadership approval for these contact programs. The political environment can shape how effective people see their contact programming being. And I think that's my last slide. Is that right? Now let's see what's next. Yes, that was my last slide. And before we go to Q&A, I just wanted to note, I see a couple folks who've worked with me very recently on evaluation of a contact-based program arrived. So Yuriko walked in, thank you for coming, and Abdurrahman is online. So there are a few others at the Carter School who've been engaged in different ways in evaluation of contact-based programming and other, I feel like this, project which Karina is leading is having lots of scaling up impact with involving a lot of others. And I'm interested for this discussion to hear from you all. We'll start with questions and I don't know if you want to say anything before we move to that, or if you're going to send them to break soon. No. Okay, so yeah, really excited for the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, because, yes. Wonderful. Any questions? We went so big breeze from it. The project is 140 pages.
That's right. That was quick for that 140 pages. Please.
I have one question. This question is always in my mind about this contact theory, the research about contact theory. For me, I mean, I think that people who willing to join this kind of research, they're supposed to be already willing to reconciliation. I mean, if you create a sampling, for example, and you are asking people to join this research, generally people who already, kind of benign ideas would join. I'm not hardliners, not radicals maybe. So how can you manage this challenge actually? Because
Actually not, I can start, and actually not. Only few projects have this preparation within the group first, and then bringing people together. But we found a lot of contact-based theories projects are actually bringing people together to start the time, to open. It has to be very well structured. It has to prepare people for It's of course have to deal with the addressing threats which people attribute to each other. It's also had to address norms. It's, as Belt told, one of the major issue is the balance of power and unequal status, how you address these issues. But majority of programs, exactly why they challenging and why they sometimes, in many cases, they succeed, it's because you bring people who never worked before, government and local communities. Farmers and herders who do not speak to each other and only if they want to kill each other, right? So, but you bring them together. Of course, people should be prepared, and we actually advocate against this way. There's the same people who are well prepared, go from training to training, from program to program. It doesn't contribute to community. Any of those projects should have long-lasting effect, and we implementing a lot of ideas from theory, how to actually sustain this idea that what people learn and how they improve thinking about each other, how it can be sustained into their working communities. So I would say it's completely opposite. The majority of programs do not prepare people, and not people who are ready. It's people who have some small willingness to actually, I might listen, but they're not ready yet. Otherwise, we don't need them.
Yeah, I'll just add that, what we haven't yet talked about is kind of the next stage of this research, which is engaging with some ongoing real live contact-based programs. And so we're doing that in a variety of ways with programs around the world, and getting to know some programs that are doing contact-based work in different ways. And one example that recently came to our attention was a place where there was a group of various participants coming together for a contact-based program. And in particular, one participant was less ready, right? And so how does that shape the group dynamics? How does that shape kind of going through the stages of, arriving and being, individuals forming, realizing that we represent different groups and then forming some common identity. How does that happen when you have someone who's not really as ready or as open and not really willing to listen? So that's a good question you ask that's on our minds based on kind of the practical experience that practitioners are raising from the field.
But it brings a lot of questions which I already stressed, and this is what we're trying to address. How to bridge language barriers, how you build trust, how you bring two groups and how you build trust, how you move from the perception, because what's happening in majority of these conflicts, the conflicts arise usually about political issues, resource sharing, absence of particular services, marginalizations, and all of that. But how the people think about them, when think about them as identity-based conflicts. They think, oh, what immediately come to people, it's the whole dynamics of, I have to stand there, the whole dynamics of relative deprivations, the whole dynamics of security dilemmas, social boundaries, and all of that. Threats is the key. And how you engage these groups, which already have a majority of barriers, which people notice, it's people have previous norms of engagement. People have previous histories of negative engagement. People feel anxiety about being in the same room with representative of other group. And this is what contact theories are dealing with, because the theory-based projects dealing with. And this is what is very important to address, and that's why we're doing this very careful analysis of literature and what people actually doing to address this issue. I don't know if I answered.
Thank you.
May I also add something? Thank you so much for that question. It's a great question. So I think we're, in a way, in many ways, I think we're speaking about conflict ripeness, right? So for those of us that are engaged in the theory, we do know that there can be such a thing as ripeness to a conflict. But in that sense, I think one of the questions there is, can you ever be ready, right? So when, and if you could get to that readiness, right, to confront, another group or a conflict, grievances, how do you do that? And to what extent do we need to feel prepared in that sense? So I think that our approach here is we think, this project thinks that probably the best way to do that is just deal with it head on, right? But we do think, circling back to your question, we do think that there's the best chance to achieve optimal intergroup contact in that sense can be in a structured way, right? So you don't necessarily have to just go kind of organic, free flow way. No, you should go about it in a very much structured, planned way.
So we have a question in the chat from Abdul Rahman, who asks, could contact-based program work on religious extremists from opposing sides? Does anyone have any experience of bringing religious extremists from two opposing sides?
We can start answering. I don't think it will be a smart decision to bring extremists on the side and say, okay, talk to each other. Unless you want to have some kinds of horror movie or something. But what we will suggest, based on what we already learned from different stages, we will really suggest to start working using this tool of mixing intergroup meetings with first of all, start with in-group meetings. Start with speaking to people within the group themselves and trying to find ways how they represent the issues, why they see religion, we have an interest, give an example, one of the projects which we have it is a project between farmers and herders. And I talk about it today in a session in the morning, but I will stress it from different perspective. Conflict is about land use. Completely, because climate change, it's completely land use issue. How communities see it? Because all farmers, majority of farmers, 90% are Christians, and majority of herders are Muslim. How do they see it? They see it as identity-based conflict. They hate each other because they belong to different religion. And every time they come together, they fight for religion, not about land use, which could be discussed. It could be find forms of shared cooperation, shared use, and so there are a lot of creative ways. What they bring religion. So how you deal with it, how you introduce identity work first within each group. We propose for them another tool, which we're very interested to see how it will be working, tool called gateway group. Again, it's come from series gateway group. It's those who have basically two identities at the same time. Some research were done on people who have both races. People, for example, who have Korean and Japanese parents. People who belong to two groups at the same time. These people open completely different perspective because they stress completely different dimension of the conflict. So we suggested for this place is to actually bring Muslim herders and Christian herders together. I mean, Muslim farmers and Christian farmers together and discuss their common issues. So they will see that it's actually not about religion, it's actually about the land use. And we'll see how it develops because it did work very well on the racial issues, it did work very well on the gender issues. Nobody did it yet on religion. So we really hope it will work. So there are a lot of other ways how you start building trust. So again, I think a lot of preparation, a lot of specific tools should be applied. But at the end, I believe you can because we analyze projects which bring together, and one of the projects we're actually working with exactly is extremists. How you bring former combatants into villages, those who killed members, and how villages actually willing to accept former combatants as member of communities. This is one of our projects. Can you bring immediately former combatants in villages? Probably not, but stage by stage, by educating communities, creating mutual learning, bringing it in the way that it's reduced threat, it works. Again, I would not do it immediately, but I would use multiple steps in the way and also reason why do you want to bring them together? Are you going to reduce polarization or you want to create a new one of our actually, we have a board of advisors, practitioners from different countries. And one of our practitioners from Africa brought us example where contact theory actually work opposite way. They are people, militants from several religious groups actually come together and created coalition against government. And so it's also can be used in a different way. So reason why you want to bring them is probably will be the biggest question. Susan, do you want to?
No, I won't add more to that other than Abdul Rahman. Certainly there's a lot of religious interfaith contact work, lots of interfaith contact work, but when you add the word extremist, that becomes much more tricky.
Exactly.
Jeff Helsing, you have your hand up. Go ahead. But you're muted.
Oh, Bob, I think the you have to unmute.
I'm gonna unmute you, Jeff.
We have ability. It's a power. Oh, yeah, it's a power of coercive power.
Okay, let's try.
Yes, I got this big thing that came up and said, the host was not allowed to unmute me or some such.
No rights, yes.
No, thank you. This is really interesting research, and the depth is to be commended. My question is, and I don't know if this is A, beyond the scope of your research, and B, I had to duck out for about 2 minutes, so maybe I missed this. But to what degree do you account for the external environment? And I'm particularly thinking of, in my experience with contact-based projects, the influence of a participant's community, family, peers, that influence on the degree to which what is accomplished in such an intergroup interaction oftentimes gets undermined when they leave the group, or the value of it can in fact be less if we don't account or we don't do follow-up in trying to determine what the impact is outside of the immediate relationships and what is transferred beyond just that core group who comes together and has contact with each other.
Do you want to start?
No, because I blanked out, Jeff, and I forgot what your question is. Sorry. No, she wants me to start, but no, I don't.
I was answering, yes, but yeah, so the question is basically impact of the local context.
Ah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the local context, meaning, do you account for in your research for the influence of the broader community environment that the participant returns to?
Gotcha.
And there can
Yeah.
be family pressure, there can be peer pressure, there can be community pressure that runs counter to the kind of ethos of what brought the people together for the contact in the first place.
Jeff, I just wanted to ask you, I'm not sure if you had joined yet during the presentation where I presented. Were you online yet, or?
Yeah.
You were? Okay. So if you recall, I think part of the some insights can be drawn from the limitations where I talked about external factors, which was the third most common limitation. And I think in this category, we've captured, so first of all, these are in terms of DRG projects, right? So I think though you're speaking about inter and intra-group also effects, right, in that sense. And I think you're also talking about spoilers. So I think I know you covered more than that, but those are just some of the things that come to mind. And I think that, for example, when I spoke about, so for example, if a conflict seems to, it seems that it's close to eruption, probably there's going to be a lot of political talks, as we've seen, that can alter, DRG programs and their objectives. I think so. That's just one little starting point. I think that Karina can add more.
So actually, that's very clarifying, I think, because I took what you said, Beltina, to be the spoilers in the influence of external factors within the group, within the project, within the contact. And so that was my interpretation of it. And my question was about what happens outside of that. So you may be accounting for that, and I misinterpreted it. So thank you for that answer.
And Jeff, I think what you're also, the question you raise is one that requires, you know, as we do research, to go into understanding the particular local context of each different contact theory program and which area of the
Mhm.
world it's working in. And what's interesting about this 3-year major research initiative that Karina is leading is that it's got 3 basic phases of research. One phase was literature review, looking at everything other people have published relating to this. Then this phase that we're reporting on today was around engaging with what practitioners know based on interviews with practitioners and project reports practitioners have written. All of that is kind of looking out big, broad, what are the broad insights we can get engaged by looking at lots of different projects. Now we're in a third phase, which is going in depth with just a few projects and really looking at people who are doing deep work in a particular place and getting to know that specific project well. And that's where we can go more deeply into looking at what's the context of this project and what makes it stand out or be different or unique. What are the special insights about, you know, reentry after a contact program when you go home in this place as opposed to when you go home in that place. So I'm excited that this project lets us look at this research question from multiple different ways. And the next phase that come back next year for Peace Week, where we'll have more answers, Jeff, about specific context.
But yeah, if
actually-
I may just, go ahead.
Sorry, Karina. No, I just wanted to give a little more details about that, Jeff. It's such a good question. What's coming to mind also, which we've talked a little bit about it, but you know, it deserves so much more attention, is challenges concerning participant engagement. So I think part of that, what you're looking for is also lays in there. So for example, when it comes to issues that were all about recruiting participants. So for example, there are not enough participants, but why is that, right?
Use
So-
of favorite text can be critical.
That was not me.
No,
Um,
no.
Yeah, so for example, asking, you know, why is it that we can't quite reach enough participants? Then that ties it to maybe you need to do better project design where you need to do a better job at mapping needs, right? What are things within a particular context that you need to pay attention to in order to implement that project and achieve that desired outcome. The other thing that comes to mind, it's also, so we've simply grouped them this way, right? But I'm sure that there are other ways to do it. So like I said, participant engagement was another example where part of the answer is, but then it's also conflict context, right? So if there is, there's in interlinkages, for example, between how not only if there's a conflict, but the conflict context connected to the intergroup context connected to the legitimacy of the project managers is just examples of how I think where these you know how the environment plays out, if that helps
And
at
I
all.
just want, and I just want to stress like issues, for example, which we saw in our analysis and now we see in this individual project. So it's very interesting how we do. We went from the global into individual, but then we will come with global again recommendations. Social norms were one of the key issues. Social norms of women engagement. It's impacted women participation because women are not allowed, but it's also impacted results of the projects. Just recently, we heard that women are educated, they know, they was taught what to do, they do the right things, and then men just say no. And and this is a shift in this dynamics. Who represented the voices again in community? How we empower people who do not have voice to actually have voice? So these issues are social norms, expectations, right? Power dynamics in community are very important part, but also then we specifically, I think it's even more complicated than we speak about government and community, because a lot of these projects government community based. And in many cultures, even we speak about trust and so on, there are also what I identify currently in Fiji, and I will start writing about it, circle of silence, where there is a respect for government which do not allow people to speak, which lead to another multiple factors. And of course, all of that's why conflict sensitive design is the key. And by conflict sensitive, we really need to address all norms, expectations, positions, identity, and power dynamics in between groups, but also where groups exist.
So, yeah,
Okay, so my name is Naoyuki Memori from Japan, and thank you very much for having me opportunity to be a part of these discussions. So I used to work as a director of contact-based educational program in Japan, which is called Campus Asia. So in that program, we invite Japanese undergraduate students and South Korean undergraduate students and Chinese undergraduate students and made them study history together. Because in East Asia, history is always important source of some conflict. So program itself was very successful. The participants could develop a very close relationship and mutual understanding. So it's okay, but the issue actually occurred after the program finished. So they returned to Japan and South Korea and China, and they feel isolated from the rest of the society in which they originally belonged. So I think it's quite ironic. The program itself is more successful than they feel more isolated in their own original society. So how would you deal with that kind of the issues? So this is I would like to hear more about your from your opinions. Yeah.
There are two ways I will talk about, and then I know Susan and Belle can address. One of the way is building of network and supporting participants. This is problems which you started and actually have long roots, which started with the seeds of peace, where Palestinian and Israeli students were brought to the United States to Maine to put them together, and they developed friendships, everything was great, and then they were returning back and they were basically threatened, they were afraid to speak. I have another very bad example from, I will not tell who, I would rather not tell who did it, but one specific institution did projects in Cyprus where they brought women from Turkish and Greek side and developed their positive relationships between them. Then women came back to their husbands and started telling them, you know, Greeks or Turks are not as bad, and they were beaten by their husbands. So we have this issue, and one of them is network support. This is what Seed of Peace start doing. They start developing network and support, specifically now online support groups, so people do not feel that they're isolated. And I think the more your group, and I know I was teaching for these students, they're wonderful. But yes, then returning back, they're going against, so empowering them, supporting them is one way to deal with it. Another way, which we are now working right now and I want Susan, maybe she can speak more about it, because she was just implementing it, but the major idea which I was like so excited from my knowledge of social identity theory is that what we usually doing with projects, we bring people together and we bring friendships. We build friendship, we bring great intergroup, interpersonal relations. They love each other, they're great friends, they cry and they leave. But then they return back, they believe that these people are actually different from all other group members. And they just create what we call in social psychology counter stereotypes, which actually reinforce negative perceptions of the outgroup. So we suggest and create second stage, and we're developing it with several projects. We'll see how it's implemented. And so second stage is actually then you bring identities back on the table. Now then you reintroduce social category. And you tell that these people are not just my friend that and that, but they're actually members of their group. So you use a lot of markers of identity, and there are multiple ways how to do it. So then they will be seen as friends who I trust and like, but now as members of their group. So these positive perceptions and trust will be now spread not only on particular members, but on the group. But now you need to cement it by developing cross-cutting identity, regional identity. And how to bring it and how teach people to actually speak to other people as the members of the common group. So this your great students had to get additional training on how actually to talk to other people about some commonalities. And I know it works because the project which I was working on analysis of the project on common history textbook between Japan, Korea, and China. It did happen. It did happen because the most controversial issues were removed, and you know you're part of it. But the textbook happened. So it's possibility to create the spaces, common spaces where there is no threat. So this free stage project, we're really hoping now to get some evidence that it does work.
And so I'll add, and Jeff Helsing has put on the chat something related to what I wanted to add.
Yeah.
There are two other ways that can help with that. One is reentry preparation. And so doing work with people to explain, this is a common problem. You have come here, you have learned to be friendly with other folks. When you go home, your family and your friends have not. And how will you prepare for that? And so to do reentry preparation. And then another way is to do follow-up programming. And so the example Jeff put in the chat is that one of the ways Seeds of Peace addressed that, and many other contact programs have addressed this, is to have follow-up programming. You know, people go home from this contact experience and there's in their community other follow-up programs to help them. There's debriefing of the experience, there's other sorts of things. Yeah, and I want to suggest during the break, if you could meet with Yuriko Noda, because I think you two have a lot in common, and she's our doctoral student focusing on these issues here. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff, for sharing that. Exactly. Yes.
Hi, it's not a question, it's more of a curiosity. I wanted to understand if from the projects that you have scoped, has contact theory been applied in carceral environments? And what has been the experience, if so?
In what?
In prison settings or in detention settings or?
Actually, this is so interesting because I just had conversation. We've had a lot of projects which in our analysis were about police, right? Engagement with police. A lot of them, we work on one of the projects which does include police and government and community members about this effective policing. But I just recently had a conversation when I was in Fiji was one organization was actually specifically, it was like they just asked me to come. It was not my major task there. But I found that I was like a resource which everyone wanted to have. So I had a conversation with NGO, which is specifically working with prisoners and how to help prisoners to actually be prepared for re-entry. And it was very important because prisoners had a lot of negative expectations, but also community members had a lot of negative expectations. So they were just initiated because actually government of Fiji gave them money for that. They were just initiating this conversation about with female. They didn't work with male, but it was women NGO. So they were working with female prisoners and community members, how to help and design these ideas, co-design TOC, theory of change, how to help these women in prison to return back to their community and be accepted and feel not threatened by community, but also how community can deal with issues that they are. So this was, they're designing this project, which was very interesting to see. And I'm sure that there are probably more. I think a lot of these transitional justice projects, they probably do use participatory research approach, and they do use contact theory for this particular reason. We have 5 minutes. Ask now or what's it?
So, yeah, so one of the, I think Avanti, you'll know more about what research is happening in carceral spaces. And it would be interesting to hear then if you do find any examples of people engaging the contact.
Yeah, maybe she will go and do it in the summer. And we will include it in this, it's a part of it, and she can be a co-author in this part.
Thank you for that trust. But yeah,
I
need to
trust,
know
I
more.
have a big trust in your minds.
Well, I'll just say, yeah, with that idea, Karina has pulled together an amazing consortium with a great advisory board and fabulous network of different researchers, connected to lots of practitioners. And I think there's space for others who are interested in this work to connect in different ways. There's going to be a lot more presentations next year and a lot more learning about specific cases in depth. So please stay in touch if you're interested in further following this work, and watch for further presentations a year from now when we're winding up the research.
Yeah, and it's a co-creation. Like it's the only way we can do it because we have unbelievable team. Like Susan, Bell, we had Mike, who already left, but we're very proud because Mike is now director of research in Democracy International. So we have other people who
Natia
were
was
working
with
with
us, and she's now
Natia.
gone to Harvard.
Yes, Natia went to Harvard. We produce the best.
Well, thank you for
Yes.
this discussion.
Okay.
Every time we talk about it, I get new insights, and thank
Yeah.
you for all the good comments and questions.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you.